Hi, I'm Yaakov, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. What is it like to spend hundreds of days inside Gaza since October 7th? In this gripping episode, I speak with Dr. Tuvia Book, an IDF reservist, an educator, an author, and a tour guide who has served continuously on the front lines of Israel's war with Hamas almost since October 7th itself. From the chaos of combat to the quiet moments between missions, Tuvia shares what daily life is like for soldiers operating in Gaza amid the ongoing ceasefire negotiations that are taking place in Doha. As Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues his trip to the United States, where he's holding talks with President Trump, Vice President Vance, and other top officials, Tuvia takes us inside the IDF's remarkable medical and technological innovations. A unit that he serves in called Palmar, a medical unit that has saved lives on and off the battlefield. He talks to us about the innovative tactics, the new technology, and the cutting-edge trauma care that he and his fellow soldiers and medics have been able to provide thousands of soldiers who have been wounded in the battles in Gaza. We also talk about the debate over the Haredi draft exemption, which continues and is even intensifying. Tuvia offers a deeply personal perspective. He explains to us what happens around the metaphorical bonfire of his unit, what the different soldiers, the ones who are religious, who are secular, and what they talk about, how they feel when there is an entire sector of Israeli society that remains exempt from military service. It's a conversation about courage, sacrifice, innovation, and the future of Israeli unity. Tuvia is a fascinating character with a great way of telling stories. You won't want to miss this.
Dr. Tuvia Book, it's great to have you on the JPPI podcast. Thank you for joining us from somewhere near the border with Gaza and what looks like to be a jeep of sorts.
Pleasure to be here. That's as much as I can tell you.
So, yes. There's a lot to talk about, and the reason that I wanted to talk with you is for a while you and I have been trying to get together, have this conversation. The fact that you've basically been in reserve duty and miluim since practically the beginning of this war, and down near the border with Gaza, as the people who are watching this can see, has not made it that easy for us to find the space and the time to do it. But here we are. The war in Gaza might be coming to an end. We don't know. We'll wait to see what happens this week with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Washington, D.C. and his talks with President Donald Trump. Will there be a ceasefire? Will there not be a ceasefire? What will that ceasefire look like? Many other questions I don't expect you to be able to answer. But I would like to hear from you. What's it like down there right now? People tend to think as if this is no longer an active war zone. What is actually happening? And as somebody who's been there and is actually there as we speak, what is the sentiment among the soldiers, reservists, and the feeling along the border?
All right, so to answer your question in one sentence, it's very much an active war zone. As you mentioned, I've been in the army since more or less October the 7th. Hundreds and hundreds of days as my fellow female male soldiers in my unit, Chayalim and Chayalot. And our particular unit is very much involved in it. Generally speaking, the soldiers who are inside Gaza are Sadir or regular serving soldiers between 18 and 21 doing their regular service. Most reserve troops have been taken up to the north, which is considered to be a quieter border. However, our particular unit, because of its skill set, is very much in the thick of things down here. Our unit is called the Palmar, which means Plugat Lechima Merchavit Rufuit, which in English is a combat medical extraction unit. And we are composed of doctors, paramedics, combat medics, and fighters. And our job basically is to go in and extract the wounded soldiers. And we always would wish we're doing nothing and just sitting and playing cards and reading books, practicing medicine. Unfortunately, particularly the last month or so, has been extremely busy. And the sights and the sounds are very much similar to what was going on at the beginning of the war as well. So the intensity is still there.
But there is a feeling, and unfortunately we've seen since June, already I think it's 21 or 22 soldiers who have lost their lives just in the last 5-6 weeks or so. So definitely Israel is paying a price. There are casualties. There are definitely also casualties on the Palestinian side. But the sense is, from what I hear and what I read, And what it seems to be is this is more guerrilla warfare. We're not fighting against the more organized Hamas units that might have been there in the beginning of the war. But like we saw with that disaster, that tragedy with the Puma, the combat engineering armored vehicle, where there was actually a video that Hamas put out where you see somebody wearing some sort of, he's wearing a camera, so you don't see him, but somebody running, and then he climbs up on top of the vehicle and drops an explosive device into the open hatch. And what was it, 6 or 7 soldiers who were killed in that explosion. This is a guerrilla warfare tactics. It's like you're fighting against an isolated terrorist here or there. I mean, how do you see this?
Well, the truth is, Yaakov, it's always been that way since the beginning. This concept of this is urban guerrilla warfare, where you're fighting a terrorist enemy embedded amongst the civilian population. It's not as if at the beginning of the war, people were marching towards each other with red coats and blue coats, like in the Battle of Waterloo and open warfare. It's always been the nature of the warfare. The difference is that they don't have any, or they have very few long-range ballistic missiles now. And also, most of their leadership has been wiped out. So they're fighting in smaller sub-cells, that is true. But for some strange reason, they seem to have endless supplies of ammunition, endless supplies of booby traps, and endless supplies of RPG, as well as small arms ammunition. So the intensity is still going on. And what you're not hearing about, you mentioned the casualties, who are fatalities, 22 actually in the last 5 weeks, and a lot of them are happening in our particular area. There's also many wounded soldiers which you don't hear about. You only hear about them when they're dead, not when they're being wounded. Some of them with life-altering wounds. So it's pretty intense right now. As people probably know, there's 5 divisions inside Gaza. That's more soldiers than there were at the beginning of the war. And again, these are proper combat infantry units, the whole of the paratrooper brigade, the whole of the combat engineers, Givati, Golani, 2 tank brigades. There's a lot of forces inside right now. And the fighting's still intense. I mean, every single day, every single night, we're hearing the booms, we're hearing the shooting, and we're in and out almost on a daily basis.
So, Tufia, I want to take a step back for a moment. I joked with you once, we were on stage together not long ago at an event, and I said, without revealing your age, that you were the oldest reservist in the IDF.
There's a Jerusalem Post article about it, so you can see that. And
there was an article. I mean, it's unusual for someone of your age to be in the military. Not that you're not ancient, just so our people understand. You're not like, a gazillion years old. I'm kidding. But you're in your mid-50s. It's not something that traditionally people do at that age. And you weren't supposed to be in Miluim. Just tell us briefly this story of how are we talking to you in uniform down at the Gaza border? How did you get there?
Okay, so Israel's a strange country. As you know recently from your famous tugboat ride, it's the only country in the world where when Israel's at a state of war, people are desperate to see whatever they can, either A, to get back in the country, or if they're in the country, to contribute in whichever way they can. And that's basically the way that I felt. And I came initially to Israel when I was 17 for a gap year with my youth movement with B'nai Kibbutz, studied in yeshiva, worked on kibbutz. And even then I decided to do a strange decision, which was to join the IDF as a lone soldier with no family at all in Israel. And ever since then, we were drummed an ethos into basic training, which is basically the Mishu lesson, where you've got to be the person. You can always say Mishu Achev. Something's important to do. You've got to do it yourself. That's what we learned in the army. That's what the officers learn. Acharai. Follow me, lead by example, dugma ishit. And you can't always say, well, you know what, I know what's wrong and what's right, but I'll let someone else do what's right. You have to be prepared to stand up and do it yourself, not just to talk the talk, but to walk the walk. And that is why initially, to answer your question, I did my IDF reserve service like everyone else until the age of 40, almost 40. The last time I did it was the Second Lebanon War, or so I thought, back in 2006. And every year we did reserve duty, and it wasn't easy. It was always when your wife's 9 months pregnant, or when you got the most important exam in university, or the crushing work project. But if everyone said, let someone else do it, we wouldn't have a state, we wouldn't have an army, because the army really needs its reserve units. Anyway, fast forward 15 years after what I thought was my last reserve duty. I was there October the 7th, like everybody else, totally surprised and shocked by the events. I just happened to be at home in Moda Inn, heard the sirens, heard the numbers pouring in of killed and wounded and kidnapped, like some kind of surreal horror film. And my very first thought, once the emotions had calmed down of shock and anger and disbelief, was, what can I do? That was my very first thought. Now, as you mentioned, I might not look it, but I am in the second half century of my life, 55 years old, when the war started. And my first thought was, well, I'm a trained combat medic. That's what I did in the army when I was in a unit called Gibati. That's what I did after the army for Magen David Adom and ambulances. Thank God I'm pretty fit. I work as a tour guide in Israel, as a Moreh Derek, so I went up and down mountains for a living, run, ride. So my first thought is, what can I do? And in Israel, everything works on rumors and hearsay and who you know. So that very day, I heard a rumor from my cousin, actually, that there was a base somewhere in the south where they were looking for medical personnel because Israel would have to respond. And that's what I did. Based on a rumor, I put in this number into my Waze, didn't even know where I was going, went downstairs, dusted my uniform that I hadn't worn for 15 years, which every Israeli keeps just in case. And yes, it still fit me. And then jumped and went to the space sight unseen. 2.5 hours later, got there. And that's when I knew it was Bashert, because the base happened to be right next to my old basic training base, as if I'd closed the circle 4 decades later. And I got in there, and like, you got to have chutzpah in Israel. They said to me, where are your papers? Where's your call-up? I said, don't have any. Well, you can't go in. But in Israel, of course, no doesn't mean no. And let's put it this way, when they weren't looking, I casually walked in, and then it was like, find Waldo, because everyone's walking around in olive green uniform. And I spent the next 2 hours selling myself to all these different medical units till I found the one I'm currently in 21 months later. And I told them, hi, my name is Tuvia, I was a combat medic, the whole story. They said, wow, you're definitely enthusiastic, you've got the skills, we'll take you. And then, of course, the real battle began, which is Israeli bureaucracy in the army, Shalishut. Took me another 2 days to convince them. But at the end of the day, that's how I got in. And I thought, just to finish off, that I had a crazy story. Turns out so many other people have crazy stories, how they got back in again.
I mean, I think it's really, Tuvia, and I've told you this before, I think it's remarkable and you know, what people do to serve their country and really, you know, step up in a way, like you mentioned, that mishahunis or whatever it is, but it's really unique and really inspirational. So tell us about this unit, the Palmar. What exactly do you do? Okay. And I know that also a lot has changed in this war when it comes to medical care and medical treatment. So explain to us also, if you can, how this is different than other previous operations and wars that the Palmar has participated in.
Okay, so the Palmar was founded out of necessity. Till this particular war, Israel had launched many smaller operations inside Gaza. And one of the things that people have noticed was that the medical care, the evacuation, was taking too long. And so this unit was specially formed. The idea was to try and do something that no one had ever done before, and that's to break the golden hour. People used to think it was impossible from the moment a soldier's wounded in the field of battle to get them to an actual hospital OR in less than an hour. That was the rationale behind finding the Palmar, where basically you get a soldier from the field to the hospital in less than an hour. It's not just getting them there, it's where there's continuous line of treatment. So there's 3 things here that are saving soldiers' lives. One is the speed of the evacuation. 2 is the continuous treatment, literally from the battlefield all the way to the OR. And 3, of course, is the incredible personnel with this cutting edge, almost science fiction medical technology that we're using that's never been used before in the field of battle.
Can you give us examples of what that means? Like, what is cutting edge? What is science fiction?
So, for example, by the way, we've had people coming to observe from the United States Army and from NATO just how we managed to do what we do, because we basically cut down the casualty rate tremendously. So an example of cutting edge is as soon as the soldier is wounded, the embedded medic who's with them in Gaza, or embedded doctor or medical personnel, they already open up a form It's called, in Hebrew, it's called a Me'ah V'echad, which just means a 101, which looks like an iPad, but actually they're putting all the treatment in as it's happening, right? And that is being beamed to the forces coming in, which is us. We're like the medical cavalry coming in to extract them. And it's also being beamed to another unit, which is called 669, which is the 669, when they come in on choppers to on these Black Hawk helicopters to evacuate seriously wounded soldiers. So as the treatment's going, all the different layers are being followed by the people coming in. So, for example, if a line has been opened to open up a vein, but there hasn't yet been injected, and suddenly the helicopter arrives, they know exactly where we are in the treatment. So they'll just carry on the treatment flawlessly, as in one continuous piece. Another incredible thing we have is we have laryngoscopes to open blocked airways with digital video cameras in the field of battle itself, so we can see where the obstructions are. Another crazy thing is we have portable ultrasound, so we can actually, in the field of battle, in battle conditions, basically see where the internal bleeding is on a computer in the field of battle. So there's a lot of tech, but also there's, just from sheer experience, the last thing I want to tell you is we're the only military on the planet Earth that uses real blood. So we have a hematologist in our unit. We have frozen blood. When I say frozen, kept at a certain temperature. Always O negative, universal donor, because you don't have time to start taking blood types. And in battle itself, we're giving, instead of a plasma substitute, which most people, every other military gives, we're giving actual blood, which speeds the process of healing tremendously and literally saves lives. One of the most famous people who people have heard about, who we gave the full blood transfusions, was the Israeli actor and singer Idan Amedi, who our unit treated as well. And without having the full blood in the field, he wouldn't be here today. So it's the speed, it's the professionalism, and the technology all together result in saving many more lives than have ever been saved before in a previous war, which otherwise would not have been saved.
And I mean, and with that, the casualty toll is not small, right?
No,
no. All in all,
and
we're looking at
casualty is a tragedy, correct?
Of course, but in a war that has been going on for 2 years or so, almost most of the fighting in Gaza, we've also had casualties in Lebanon during this period. But we are talking about several hundred soldiers, just I think shy of about 500 who have been killed in the fighting. If you add that with the October 7th casualties, then obviously it's much more. But I mean, can you give us an estimate? Maybe this isn't a fair question, but I'll ask it anyhow, Tuvia. How many more would we be talking about if it weren't for this really remarkable improvement and upgrade in medical capabilities?
I can't give you the exact number, but what I can tell you is there's many cases I've been involved in. There's more than one Palmar, by the way. There's Palmarim all the way along the Gaza front here, which is one of many, of 8 that actually exist. I've been in cases personally involved in evacuations where for sure they would have died without our care. It was that close, the difference in life and death. So I can't give you a number estimate, but I definitely know it's considerable. It's the lowest in the world ratio of wounded to actually dying who otherwise would have died. The exact numbers I'm not sure of, but it's way up there. We would have probably dealing, instead of dealing tragically with triple digits, we would have been dealing with quadruple digits without this particular without these units in the field. In fact, as soon as the units know that we've arrived, they know the door to the hospital's already opened.
Yeah, no, and that golden hour, as you mentioned, is what's so critical in getting people out. I mean, there have been some stories of evacuations that have literally taken minutes. No, I mean, there's stories. Can you share with us 1 or 2 stories of that really illustrate this for us?
Well, there's a couple of stories. One I want to refer back to the Idan Amedi story. Initially, there was a mass casualty event over there. It's called the Iran in Hebrew, where there was many wounded, again, unfortunately, combat engineers, a massive explosion. There was dead soldiers as well. There were soldiers who were barely alive. And initially, when we got to Idan Amedi, he did not have a pulse and he wasn't bleeding and he wasn't breathing. In any other military in the world, he would have been left for dead. Well, we thought he didn't have a pulse. One of our combat doctors found a very, very faint pulse, even though he was unconscious and he wasn't breathing. Based on that faint pulse, we the whole team went on top of him. We cleared the airway. We were manually breathing with an ambo and putting in, as I mentioned, real blood. We didn't even know who it was because he was so badly. There were so many burn marks on, and his idea being blown up.
Don Ahmedi, not just the singer; he's the actor from Fauda.
He's the actor in Fauda, correct, right. And he made a lot of headlines when he joined initially because he was pretty old. He was like 35, 36, all relative the age thing. But also married with 2 kids and very famous. And he didn't need to serve. But he said, no, our country's the one going to serve as well. But we didn't know who it was. It wouldn't make a difference. We're treating a wounded soldier. But the point is that based on a slight pulse, because the work the team did when the helicopters came in, the Black Hawk helicopters, he was not stable. So we evacuated another 2. Then we called in another helicopter and he still wasn't stable. He wasn't breathing. The conscience hadn't returned. And that went. And eventually, by the time we got him stable enough to move him, we asked if there was any other helicopters in the area. And the only one was the Deputy Chief of Staff, who had a much bigger helicopter, Sikorsky helicopter, Yasur. And he landed this huge helicopter, which could normally take about 30 soldiers just for one wounded soldier. That's important. Every life is in the IDF. And he was evacuated and his life was saved. Now, that's one example. Any other army in the world, he would have been left for dead on the battlefield. But because of the real blood, because of the technology, because of being able to look into the airway with the video cameras, and because of the expert treatment of top surgeons, his life was saved. That's one small example.
So, Tuvia, I want to be careful taking you into political terrain because you are wearing a uniform.
I plead the fifth.
Well, I haven't asked my question yet. So, just wait a second.
I preempted it. Yes.
But I want to go. I want to talk just for a moment. We don't know what's going to happen. We're recording this just as Prime Minister Netanyahu is making his way to Washington. We don't know what will come of potential ceasefire talks, whether there will be a ceasefire, there will not be a ceasefire. But I am curious, among the soldiers that you serve alongside, and some of them reservists and some of them soldiers, men and women who are doing their mandatory service, how much is the hostages an issue that comes up? Like, is it something that's on the front burner? Is it an issue that people still talk about? Or is it, I'm sure they talk about it, but or is it more still the priority? We got to get all the last Hamas members and the last terrorists and the last tunnel and the last arms cache. What is it, the talk within the army when thinking about what the priority of the continued operation should be, if it is, for example, to continue or not?
Okay, so I don't think that's too political. So therefore, I will endeavor to answer.
I told you, don't be so suspicious of me. Come on.
You did mention the P word. Anyway, so what's interesting about the army, as everyone knows, is it's a melting pot for Israeli society. So we have people in our unit from many different political and religious views, in fact, different religions. We also have Druze soldiers and we have Christian soldiers as well. In addition to having men and women, secular, religious, left-wing, right-wing, we have people here who would literally vote right across the spectrum politically in Israel, from the very left to the very right. And I would say the number one concern of everyone here, before any military concerns, is the hostages. You ask why people are still serving all these days later. I have people who are serving my unit who said, we want to be here till the hostages are out. That's their motivating factor. More than the military considerations, I would say, as well. And one of the most emotional events we were involved with was one of the hostage rescues, the famous hostage rescue with Noah Argemani and the 3 guys who were in the apartment. So we were involved. We were on the periphery of that. We were the medical backup team. And it's super emotional, to see the amount of power Israel invested in these hostage rescues, the sheer force that was in there, and the absolute jubilation. We were like on a high for literally days afterwards. So I'd say more than the military considerations, I would say it's definitely what Hamas knows, our Achilles heel, which is the hostages. I say that was the prime motivating factor why people keep turning up time and time again for reserve duty. This is my 7th reserve duty period, and it's all about the hostage, I would say. And the military is there, but I'd say that was secondary.
Would it be, again, you could give me your personal opinion or share with maybe what you feel the overwhelming sentiment would be within at least the soldiers you serve alongside. But I'm curious, if the war were to end, because it's obviously a big discussion here in Israel and often it falls along party lines, where you vote, how you vote. Do you think that we have to keep going no matter what? And we see the discussions and the debates within the security cabinet. And I'm not going to, whether Smotrich and Ben Gvir who want to keep going no matter what, until what they call the Nitzachon HaMuchlat, the total victory, whatever that is, which I, for long, have not believed is real in the sense of what people want to believe it is, right? They're sold an idea that is more like a Hollywood film ending, the victory and the raising of the flag and we won and everyone's dead. It doesn't always work that way, especially not in an urban setting like Gaza with so many people and the need for a governing entity to come after. But where I'm going with this is, would there be a bitter taste, though, at least among the soldiers you serve with, do you think, that if this war were to end in the weeks to come with a ceasefire, we'd get back we'd get back in the first stage based on what the ceasefire proposal on the table talks about, 10 of the living hostages, 18 of the bodies, 60-day ceasefire, and then hopefully during that period negotiations for a complete cessation of hostilities would mean that Hamas is somehow in some capacity still in Gaza. Would it leave a bitter taste, do you think? Would people feel like, what was this all about at the end if Hamas is still in power?
Yes. I would definitely say so. I mean, at the end of the day, you mentioned the soldiers themselves. 22 soldiers have been killed in the last 5 weeks. That's more than our living hostages. So when you think about the price that's being paid, and amongst the things we've done here in our unit is we've gone to the kibbutzim on the periphery, on the kibbutzim in Otef Aza, in the Gaza envelope. And I've spoken to people who said they wouldn't feel comfortable going back to the kibbutz if they know there's still Hamas on the other side. We all know what happened last time. We had those ghoulish parades as they were releasing the hostages, even as in the infamous case of Shiri Bibas, where they knowingly put the wrong coffin in. The sight of them jumping out of their holes in the ground and waving Hamas flags and saying, "We won because we managed to survive," really make people's stomach churn and make people very, very sick to the core. Yes, as you mentioned, there are two aspects of this war. On the one hand, we want our hostages back, specifically the living hostages. I think it's even more important. Whilst we don't even know how many are still alive, there's two that we're not even sure about. But we also want this will never happen again. I don't want my children or grandchildren to have to once again fight Hamas in the next round. So there would definitely be a sense of disappointment.
This is the real dilemma, and this is a real challenge and a real this makes this whole reality so complex, and it's not a zero-sum game of what a victory looks like here. And I think it's important for people to understand the people tend to, I'm not here to defend Smotrich and Ben Gvir, don't get me wrong, not a big fan, but they're not 100% wrong with what they're saying, right? In other words, there's a legitimate side to that. There's a legitimate side, of course, to say the first and foremost is to get back the hostages. And this country needs to maneuver with a lot of different balls in the air, the relations now with the Americans and what's going to happen with the day after, and is normalization possible with the Saudis on the horizon and so many other things. I want to pivot for a moment, though, and take you into maybe, similarly dangerous political terrain, but maybe I think you could talk about this. You're a reservist. You've served now hundreds of days of reserve duty, literally hundreds. There are tens of thousands of people in this country who do not serve. They don't serve compulsory service. They don't serve in the reserves, the Haredim. We're talking about the ultra-Orthodox Jews in this country. The army, it's no secret, are short now about 10,000 to 15,000 soldiers every year just to fulfill the missions that are on the table today. We don't know what's going to be tomorrow. Today. There was a story I read in the newspaper on Sunday about how a group of soldiers from the Shimshon Battalion of the Kfir Brigade are actually petitioning the High Court of Justice because they are saying to the High Court that their service is over, and the Army has drafted them on a new. There's like a military rule that allows them, even when their full service is over, 2 years, 8 months, 3 years, whatever it is, to have them add on another 4 months and tack it on top for reserve duty because they don't have soldiers. I mean, let's be honest. It's great that you're serving. You're doing something amazing. Your self-sacrifice, we can only salute and thank you till eternity for. But you shouldn't be in the army. There should be other people doing this. And it should be the ultra-Orthodox. I mean, how much does this bother you personally? How much is it spoken about in the unit? As people might tell by my voice, I get a little excited talking about this because it deeply upsets me. But I'm curious, Tuvia, like, is this a conversation you're having?
You just hit the nail on the head. That's the one issue where there is consensus. Usually the old joke goes 2 Jews and 3 opinions, or as we say, Shivim Panim Torah, the 70 faces of the Torah. And the one thing everybody's united on in our particular unit, because we have discussions. Sometimes we sit around, the proverbial bonfire and talk about things. And it's fascinating because normally one tends to hang around with a friends group. They're just like you hang out in a bubble. But here we have the whole gamut, as I mentioned before. We have 2 doctors. One of them has a same-sex partner, piercings and tattoos, and he works right next to a guy with a huge kippah and tzitzis hanging out. So normally, if they weren't in the military, they wouldn't be sort of hanging around the same friend group. But because in the army, we respect what we have in common, not what divides us. But the one thing that there's total consensus, you don't even want to get me started on this, is that issue of service, unequal burden of service. And that's what it's called, more or less a translation to English. And it's a huge hot issue. On the one hand, you have this fear unit, which I also read about as well, who are appealing because they're basically being forced, like they found all these legal loopholes to keep them serving and serving and serving, and even to take away the month that soldiers are supposed to have just to refresh themselves before they leave their service. That was also taken away. On the other hand, you have people who don't give a damn about national service or even about the casualty rates because it doesn't affect their community. And it's a huge issue. And the same government that is basically finding all these loopholes to keep soldiers serving is also trying to fast forward laws against any ultra-Orthodox Jews having to do any service purely for political expediencies. And one of the problems in this country, which is no shortage of problems, is the uneven burden of service. Now, I just want you to know it's not just the soldiers who are serving, it's the families. My MP, my commanding officer, he has a 3-month-old baby at home in addition to another child, and his wife has basically been a single mom for almost 2 years already. It is affecting the entire Israeli society. There's those that do and give and those that don't and take.
But isn't also the problem, and I don't say this, tongue-cheek or whatever the term is, but I mean, we have such amazing people who are willing to stand up and give, and because of people like yourself and others, then the government can get away with this, right? Because they know that when push comes to shove, people will stand up and say, you said acharai. Well, there's another term, hineni, I'm here, right? Here I am.
We have every war we have is something called milchemet en brera. It's a war without a choice. If we didn't fight it, we wouldn't be here. On the other hand, it's not just the soldiers who are standing up. We have amazing people on the ORF as well. Even now, 2 years later, we have people coming to our unit to give us food and to give us help and massages, whatever we want, basically. The people really, it's not that people don't appreciate what we do. I'm talking about the civilian population. They also appreciate and still have the koach, the strength to come out and show their support. But in many ways, it feels like there are 2 Israels, those who serve and those who don't. It really does have that feeling inside Israel as well. I spoke to a computer engineer friend of mine who went to fix the computer of an ultra-Orthodox mayor in one of the cities, one of the ultra-Orthodox cities, and he asked the mayor about what he thought about the war, and the mayor said to him, "What war are you talking about?" And that's when he packed up his bag and left the room. It's such a disconnect from what's going on. And this expression in Hebrew, which is Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bazeh, that all Jews, all Israel are responsible one for the other. And it seems to be that there's a certain segment of society that doesn't feel that don't feel like they're responsible, don't feel like they have to do their part, don't feel like they have to give, and just feel like they have to take. It's a very, very, very un-Jewish value. The Jewish value is what we say every Rosh Chodesh, Kol Yisrael Chaverim, that all Jews are responsible one for the other. And the slogan from the beginning of the war is B'yachad Nenatzeach. And it seems the Yachad is just the Zionist part of the country, not the non or the anti-Zionist part of the country. They don't feel part of the cloud, part of the whole. And it's a huge, huge bone of contention, which doesn't mean that people aren't still turning up to serve.
Before I let you go, Tuvia, I'm just going to read the final paragraph of your Times of Israel blog, your recent piece from just a couple of days ago. And it goes like this. As we navigate these historic times, I'm reminded of the profound significance of our actions in shaping the future of the Jewish people. With each day of service, each sacrifice made, we're not only defending our present, but also laying the foundation for a brighter tomorrow. I'm deeply honored and stand united with my fellow soldiers, driven by a shared commitment to protect our children, our homeland, and the enduring legacy of the Jewish people. And on that note, Tuvia, I think we all just owe you a big thanks. Thank you for being with me here on the JPPI podcast. And just thank you for your service, and stay safe, and hope to see you again soon on a stage somewhere in Israel or elsewhere around the world.
Thank you very much for having me, and Laila Tov and Laila Shaked. Have a peaceful and quiet night.